I've been keeping a tally in the back of my ledger for 40 years. Rainfall, mostly. Cattle sold. The day my wife passed, marked with nothing but a small black cross because I couldn't make my hand write the words. So when I tell you I remember the exact morning, the Vashti girl walked out to the dry wash with 2 empty buckets, and everyone in Cardero County pretending not to watch her, understand that I only remember it because I wrote it down. Everything else from that summer I'd have gladly forgotten. The heat that year had a texture to it. That's the only way I know to say it. You could feel it press against your teeth when you breathed through your mouth, and by 9 in the morning the air over the flats went to that shimmer that makes a man doubt his own eyes. I'd lost 11 head already. Old Deacon, my neighbor to the south, had lost more, and he wasn't a man to lose things quietly. Her name was Ruth Vashti, though nobody in town called her that. They called her the Syrian's daughter, which wasn't even right. Her people had come up from somewhere near the Lebanon coast 2 generations back, and by the time Ruth was born they were as American as the rest of us, which is to say stubborn, sunburnt, and in debt to the same bank. But small towns don't traffic in accuracy. They traffic in the shape of a thing, and the shape they decided on for the Vashtis was outsider, and once a town decides on a shape it stops looking any closer. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the water first, because in Cardero County that summer, everything was about the water. The Cardero Aquifer ran under all our land like a secret nobody had earned. For 60 years it had given up its water sweet and cold to anybody who could sink a pipe deep enough to reach it, and we'd all grown fat and lazy on the certainty of it. Then the drought came, the 3rd year of it, and the water table dropped like a stone down a well. First the shallow wells went. Then the deeper ones started coughing up mud and grit, and finally nothing but the sound of a pump straining against dry stone. By July there were 4 wells left running in the whole county. Deacon controlled 2 of them. The association, that's what they called themselves, the Cardero Landowners Association, though it was really just Deacon and 6 men who owed him money or favors. The association controlled the other 2. And they had decided in the way that frightened men decide things that water would be distributed fairly, which meant according to a list, and the list was Deacon's list. The Vashtis were not on the list. I want to be honest about my own part in this, because if I dress it up you won't believe the rest. When Deacon stood up at the Grange Hall that first week of July and read the names of who'd get water and who wouldn't, I sat in the 3rd row with my hat in my lap and I said nothing. Ruth's father, Elias, had died the previous winter. Her mother was gone years before. She was 23 years old, running 80 acres of failing orchard alone, and she was not on the list, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself a lot of things that summer. She came to the Grange Hall the 2nd week, when the notice had had time to sink in and the reality of it, no water, none, not a drop from the 4 working wells, had started to show on her. I remember she stood in the doorway a moment before coming in, and the light was behind her so I couldn't see her face, only the shape of her, thin and very straight, like something that had decided not to bend. "I've come to ask about the water," she said. Deacon didn't stand. He was a big man gone soft in the way big men do when they stop working and start only deciding. He had a way of not looking at you directly when he meant to hurt you, like he was addressing a spot just past your shoulder. "List's the list, Miss Vashti," he said. "Nothing personal in it. My trees are dying. Everybody's trees are dying." He said it almost gently, and that was the worst of it. "That's the drought. Can't put you ahead of families that have been here. My family has been here 51 years. Families that are part of the association." He let that sit. "You never joined. Your father never joined. You want the county's water, you come to the county's meetings, you pay the county's dues. That's how it works. That's fair." I watched her hands. She had them folded in front of her, and I watched her knuckles go white and then, slowly, go loose again, like she was talking herself out of something. When she spoke again, her voice had gone very quiet and very even. "The dues are $400. Association's got expenses. You know I don't have $400. And Deacon looked at her then, actually looked at her for the first time, and something crossed his face that I've spent years trying to name. It wasn't cruelty exactly. Cruelty would have been easier to forgive. It was something closer to relief. Relief that here finally was someone lower than him, someone he could stand on to keep his own head above the water. A drowning man will climb another man's shoulders and call it survival. "Then I guess," he said, "you don't have water." She didn't cry. I'll give her that, and I noticed it because I'd have cried. She just nodded once, slow, like she was filing the information away somewhere, and she turned and walked out into that killing light. And the Grange Hall let out its breath and moved on to the next order of business, and I sat there with my hat in my lap and my mouth shut, 40 years of tally marks, and not one of them for the thing I should have done. Now here is where I have to tell you about the buckets. 3 days after the Grange Hall, I was riding my south line, what was left of it, checking fence that didn't have any cattle left to keep in, when I came up over the rise above the dry wash that separated my land from the Vashti orchard. And there she was. She had 2 buckets, the galvanized kind, and she was walking out across the cracked bed of the wash toward the old cottonwoods that marked the far edge of her property. The trees out there were the oldest on her land, planted by her grandfather, and everybody knew they were the first thing you'd give up in a drought because they were ornamental. They didn't bear. They were just shade and memory. Nobody wastes water on memory. I sat my horse and watched her, and I thought, God forgive me, I thought the girls finally cracked, hauling empty buckets out to save trees that were already lost. I almost rode down to stop her to say something, though I don't know what. But something in the way she walked stopped me. It wasn't the walk of somebody who'd given up. It was purposeful, private. She kept glancing back toward the road like she wanted to be sure no one was watching, and I had the sudden strong feeling that I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see. So I did the cowardly thing, which was also this once the right thing. I stayed on the rise and I watched. She went to the base of the largest cottonwood, the one with the split trunk that lightning had opened 40 years back. She set down her buckets, and then she knelt, and she pulled aside a great flat pad of dead prickly pear and some deadfall branches that I'd have sworn were just drought trash, and underneath there was I couldn't see. The angle was wrong. But I saw her lower one bucket down into the earth on a rope, and I heard, faint across that dead-silent wash, the sound that every man in Cardero County would have crawled over broken glass to hear. A splash. The sound of a bucket hitting water. I didn't tell anyone. That's the first thing you have to understand about me, and maybe the only thing that redeems me a little. I sat on that rise, and I watched the Vashti girl draw 2 buckets of water from a well that no one knew existed, water her grandfather's memorial cottonwoods, and cover it all back up with dead cactus and branches. And I turned my horse around and rode home, and I told no one. I told myself it was because it wasn't my business. But that was the same lie I'd been telling all summer, and I was starting not to believe my own lies anymore. The truth was closer to shame. I'd watched them starve her out. I'd sat in the 3rd row, and now I'd stumbled onto the one thing that might save her, and I understood, the way you understand a thing in your gut before your head catches up, that if the association found out about that well, they wouldn't just take her water. They'd find a way to take her land. Deacon had wanted the Vashti orchard for years. It sat right over the deepest part of the aquifer. A well that still ran when everything else had gone dry wasn't just water. It was proof of what lay under that ground. It was a reason. So I kept quiet, and I watched her through July, from a distance, telling myself I was minding my own business when what I was really doing was standing guard over a secret I had no right to. Here is what I learned about Ruth Vashti that month, watching her the way you watch weather, from far off and with respect. I learned she rationed herself. The well was small, a hand-dug seep her grandfather had found and never registered, back before there were laws about registering such things, back when a family could have a private mercy in the ground and keep it. It didn't give much. A few buckets a day, and if she drew too fast it ran cloudy and she'd have to wait. So she rationed. And here's the thing that undid me. She watered the trees before she watered herself. I watched her in the worst heat of that summer, in a drought that was killing grown men's ambitions and old men's cattle, carry water to her grandfather's cottonwoods and her father's fruit trees before she'd take a full cup for her own cracked lips. I could see it on her even from the rise, the way she'd started to move slow, to favor the shade, to sit down more than a young person should. She was giving the water to the living things she was responsible for, and keeping herself on the edge of what a body could stand. I'd like to tell you I understood it as nobility. At the time I mostly found it maddening. Take the water, girl, I wanted to shout across the wash. You fool, you stubborn fool, drink. But I think I understood even then that she wasn't being noble. She was being something harder than noble. She was refusing to let the drought decide what she loved. Deacon could keep her off his list. The sky could keep back its rain. But nobody was going to make Ruth Vashti stop tending the things her people had put in the ground. That was hers to decide, and she was going to decide it with her own body if she had to. The thing broke open in August. It always breaks open. Secrets in a small town are like water themselves. They find the low ground eventually, they seep. What happened was the association's own wells started to fail. I don't think Deacon believed it could happen. He'd built his whole authority that summer on the certainty of that water, and when the first of his 2 wells started coughing mud in the second week of August, I think it frightened him more than the drought itself. Because a man like Deacon doesn't fear thirst. He fears being ordinary. He fears being just another sunburnt fool at the mercy of a sky that doesn't know his name. He called an emergency meeting. The Grange Hall was packed this time, every family in the county, because now it wasn't just the Vashtis and the other unlucky ones without water. Now it was everybody. If the association's wells went, we were all finished. There'd be nothing left but to load what we could and drive away from land our grandfathers had broken with their hands. I sat in the 3rd row again. Habit, I suppose, and I watched Deacon try to hold a room full of frightened people together with nothing but the sound of his own voice, and I watched him fail, and I want to tell you I felt sorry for him, but I didn't. I felt the thing you feel when a bully finally meets something bigger than he is. It isn't satisfaction, it's just quiet. And in the middle of all that fear, somebody said it. I never did learn who. Some voice from the back, the way these things always come from the back, from a mouth that won't own itself. The Vashti girls got water. The room went still. Her orchard's green. Anybody driven past, her trees are green. Where's she getting water if she's not on the list? And every head in that Grange Hall turned slow, the way a herd turns when it smells something on the wind, and I felt my own heart go down into my boots because I knew right then that I was about to watch them do it again. Watch them decide on a shape for her. Thief, hoarder, outsider with something we need. And this time there'd be no walking out into the light. This time they'd follow her. Ruth wasn't at the meeting. She'd stopped coming after the first time. There was no point. So they talked about her the way you can only talk about someone who isn't in the room, and the fear in them curdled into something uglier. And by the time the meeting broke up, there was a plan of sorts. Deacon and some of the association men would ride out to the Vashti place in the morning. To talk, to see about this water, to find out what a young woman alone owed to the county in a time of common need. I rode home in the dark. I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed next to the empty place where my wife used to be, and I did the arithmetic I'd been avoiding all summer. On one side, my standing in the county, my association membership, my quiet, safe life of tally marks and minding my own business. On the other side, a girl who'd watered her dead grandfather's trees before she'd drink, and who was going to wake up in a few hours to find frightened men in her yard. 40 years of keeping my head down, 40 years of the 3rd row. I got up before dawn. I saddled my horse in the dark, and my hands were shaking, and I told myself it was the cold, though it was August and there was no cold. And I rode out toward the Vashti orchard to do the first brave thing I'd done since they put my wife in the ground, though I didn't know yet what it would cost me, or her, or what we'd all find waiting at the bottom of that old hidden well when the county finally came to see. The dust told me I was too late before I ever saw the men. You learn to read dust in ranch country the way sailors read cloud. A single rider throws a thin plume that hangs and drifts. A wagon kicks up something wide and low. But 4 or 5 horses moving with purpose throw up a thing that has intent in it, a brown smear against the gray pre-dawn sky. And that was what I saw as I came over the last rise before the Vashti orchard. Not 1 plume but 2, mine and theirs, converging on the same green square of land like water running toward a drain. They'd left earlier than they said. Of course they had. Frightened men always move before they mean to. The fear won't let them wait for a decent hour. Deacon had told the Grange Hall morning, and morning to a coward means the dark before it, when the deed can be half done before the sun's up to look at it. I put my heels to my horse and I rode. By the time I came down into her yard, they were already off their horses, 5 of them. Deacon in the middle, big and gray-faced, and around him the men who owed him Prout, who'd lost his wife's respect along with his South Quarter. The Hollies brothers who did what they were told, and old Renner, who I'd have thought was better than this and who couldn't meet my eye, which told me he thought so too. And Ruth. She was standing on the low porch of her father's house with a rifle held down along her leg. Not raised, not pointed. Just there the way a hard truth is there in a room, and the men were arranged in a loose half-circle in front of her the way men arrange themselves when they haven't decided yet whether they're a mob. I want to describe her to you as she was in that moment, because I've carried the picture 40 years, and it hasn't faded the way the rest has. She was thin past what a young woman should be. The rationing had done that. I could see now, close up, what the well's small mercy had cost her, the sharp wrists, the hollow under the cheek, the lips gone pale and split. She'd been giving her water to trees while these men drank their fill off Deacon's list. And she stood there on her porch, a starved girl holding a rifle she plainly did not want to raise, and she looked at 5 grown men in her yard, and she was not afraid. Or if she was, she'd folded the fear up small and put it somewhere the way she'd folded her hands at the Grange Hall. She decided something. I'd learn what before the morning was out. "You're on my land," she said. "We've come to talk, Miss Vashti." Deacon had his gentle voice on, the one he used just before he hurt you. "That's all, just to talk about the water." "There's nothing to talk about. You made your list. I'm not on it. Fair's fair, those were your words." She let that land. "Get off my land." Deacon spread his hands, a big man's gesture of reasonableness that fooled nobody. "The situation's changed. Our wells are failing. The whole county's failing. And you've got green trees, Miss Vashti. Green trees in August, in the worst drought in living memory. Now where does a woman with no water on the list get water to grow green trees?" I'd stopped my horse at the edge of the yard. Nobody had looked at me yet. I was outside the circle, the way I'd been outside everything all summer, watching from the edge, and I felt the old cowardice rise up in me and say, "This still isn't your business. You could still turn around." And I want you to know how close I came to listening to it. Even then, even after everything. "There's no well," Ruth said. "It was a lie, and it was a brave one, and it didn't work." "Bill Cawley saw you," Prout said, and there it was, my own name, though I hadn't spoken it and hadn't told a soul. My stomach dropped. "Riding your south line back in July, said your orchard was green when his cattle were dying." Prout hadn't seen me watch her draw water, nobody had. But he'd seen me riding, and small towns don't need the truth, only the shape of it, and the shape was Cawley knows something. I understood then that my silence hadn't protected her. It had only made me a rumor. A man who keeps a secret badly is worse than a man who tells it outright, because he leaves everyone free to imagine. Ruth's eyes came to me, first time, and I saw her do the arithmetic, the same arithmetic I'd been doing all summer, except she did it in about a second and a half, standing starved on her porch with a rifle she wouldn't raise. Is this man with them or against them? And I saw her decide she didn't know, which was fair. I hadn't given her any reason to know. "I don't know what Bill Cawley saw," she said, still looking at me. "Why don't you ask him?" Every head turned, and there it was, the moment. The third row, 40 years of it, and now there was no third row to sit in. There was just the yard and the dust settling, and 5 men and a starving girl all waiting to hear what kind of man I was. I've thought a great deal about what makes a coward finally not be one. I used to think it was courage arriving, like weather, like a front moving in. It isn't. Courage never came for me that morning. I was afraid the whole time, my mouth dry as the wash, my hands sweating on the reins. What came instead was something smaller and stranger. It was the memory of her carrying water to those trees. Of a girl deciding, with her own hungry body, what she was going to love no matter what the sky and the association said. And I understood that I had been given the same decision she'd been given. Only mine came without any starving, without any cost I could point to. And I had been failing it all summer, while she passed hers every single day out there in the killing heat with 2 galvanized buckets. "There's a well," I said. Ruth's face didn't change, but something went out of it, a hope she hadn't known she was holding. "There's a well," I said again louder, because my voice had come out cracked the first time. "Her grandfather dug it, seep-fed out by the old cottonwoods. It's small, gives a few buckets a day, no more. I saw her draw from it back in July." I made myself look at Deacon. Just past his shoulder, the way he always looked at other people, and I found I couldn't do it, so I looked him dead in the eye instead. "And she's been watering her trees with it, not selling it, not hoarding it, watering her dead grandfather's trees and going thirsty herself to do it. That's your water thief, Deacon, that's your emergency." The silence after that had weight to it. I don't know what I'd expected. Shame, maybe. I'd handed them the truth of her, the starving and the trees, and some fool part of me thought the truth might do the work that decency should have done all summer. That they'd see her the way I'd finally made myself see her and be ashamed. But that's not how fear works. I know that now, I didn't then. A few buckets a day, Deacon said slowly. And I watched him turn it over, and I watched him arrive not at shame, but at arithmetic. A seep well, out over the deep part of the aquifer. His gray face was doing something now, some calculation running under it. That means the water's still down there, boys, under her land. It's dropped past our wells, but it's still feeding her seep, which means nothing to you, Ruth said. It's my grandfather's well, on my land. Registered to no one because there was no law when he dug it, and he dug it with his own hands, and it's mine. It's the county's water in a time of. It is not. And now the rifle came up. Not far, just off her leg, just enough that the barrel had an opinion now, and the Hollies brothers took a step back, and Renner took two. It's mine. I have watered my trees with it, and I have gone thirsty for it, and not one of you, asked whether I was living or dying out here all summer while you drank off Deacon's list. You didn't care whether I had water. You only came when you found out I did. That was the thing, wasn't it? That was the whole rotten center of it, and she'd said it plain. They hadn't come to help a thirsty woman. They'd come to take from a woman who, against all their arithmetic, had something. Her value to them had been 0 when she was starving and became everything the moment she had water. That's a thing worth knowing about people, and it's a bitter thing, and she'd learned it at 23 on her own porch with a rifle she didn't want to fire. Here is the moment I have to tell carefully, because it's the one that mattered, and because it didn't go the way any story would have it go. Deacon didn't back down. I'd half hoped the rifle would do it. But a man who's built his whole self on being the one who decides can't back down in front of the men who owe him. The backing down would cost him more than the water. So he did the thing that frightened men do when they can't retreat. He got calm. "Put the rifle down, Miss Vashti," he said. "You're not going to shoot 5 men, and even if you shot one, the other 4'd take that well and your land and everything on it, and no court in this county would hang us for it, and you know that too. So put it down, and let's talk about what's fair." He was right, that was the horror of it. He was right, and she knew he was right, and I knew it, and I watched her know it. The rifle was a bluff, and everyone in the yard understood it was a bluff. One starving girl against 5 men, and the whole weight of a county that had already decided her shape. And Ruth Vashti lowered the rifle. She lowered it slow, and she set it down on the porch boards, and she straightened up, and for one terrible moment I thought I'd watched her give in. I thought the summer had finally broken her, that the arithmetic had finally come out against her the way it comes out against most of us in the end. Then she said, "Come out to the well then, all of you. I'll show you the water, and you can decide what's fair standing over it." I didn't understand. Neither did Deacon. I could see it flicker in him, the suspicion that she'd given in too easy. But he'd won, or thought he had, and a man who thinks he's won stops looking closely, the same failure of attention that lets a town decide a shape and never look again. So they went. All of them tromping out across her yard and down into the dead wash toward the old cottonwoods, Deacon in the lead, the Hollies brothers and Prout and Renner strung out behind, and Ruth walking last, unarmed, her hands loose at her sides. I got off my horse and I followed. I still didn't know what she meant to do, but I knew I wasn't going to watch it from the rise this time. Whatever happened at that well, I was going to be standing in the yard for it. She'd told the truth about the well, that much I'll say. When she pulled aside the pad of dead, prickly pear, and the deadfall her grandfather's mercy was right there in the ground, a stone-lined shaft, hand-dug narrow, going down maybe 15 feet to a black gleam at the bottom that caught the first real light of the sunrise and threw it back up at us. Water. Cold and real and impossible in that dead summer. The men crowded around the lip of it and looked down, and I watched greed and relief war in their faces. And Deacon knelt at the edge, and looked at that dark water like a man looking at his own salvation. "See," he said, "now that's not so hard, is it? There's water enough here for—" "There's water enough for the trees," Ruth said, "and for me and for no one else. And I'll tell you why, and then you can do as you like, because I can't stop 5 of you, and I know it." She stood over them, over Deacon kneeling at the well he meant to take, and the sun came up over the cottonwoods behind her so that once again I couldn't quite see her face, only the straight, thin shape of her against the light, the shape that had decided not to bend. "This seep gives a few buckets a day," she said. "You saw me draw it. Bill saw me draw it. A few buckets. That's not a lifeline for a county. You can't irrigate off it. You can't save your cattle with it. You can drink from it, the 6 of us, and it'll run dry inside a month with 6 mouths on it. and then you'll have taken my grandfather's well and killed it, and you'll be exactly as thirsty as you are right now, only you'll have my land and my blood on your hands to show for it." She let that sit. "That's the truth of what you're standing over. It's not a fortune, it's a cup, and you're about to fight me for a cup and call it fair." Deacon knelt there at the lip of the well, and I watched the arithmetic run through him one more time, and I watched it come out for the first time all summer, the way it should. Because she was right. The well was small. He'd built the whole ride out here on the fantasy of a hidden fortune of water, enough to matter, enough to justify the taking. And what he'd found was a cup. A private mercy that would die the moment it was made public. That was worth everything to one thirsty woman and almost nothing to a dying county. There was no profit in the cruelty. That was what got through to him when decency couldn't. Not that it was wrong to take her water, I don't flatter him that far, but that it was pointless. And a bully will sometimes stop at pointless where he'd never stop at wrong. But I'd been watching her too, all summer from the rise and now up close, and I'd learned to read her a little the way I read weather and dust. And I saw something in her face as she stood over that well, something that hadn't been there in her words. She wasn't just protecting a cup. I looked down into the well again at that black gleam, and I looked at the way the water sat, and I thought about what Deacon had said before she let us all out here. It's dropped past our wells, but it's still feeding her seep. The water's still down there, and a slow, cold understanding started to move in me, the kind that comes up from the gut before the head has the words. The seep was small. She was telling the truth about that. But a seep is fed. A seep is the aquifer's finger reaching up through a crack in the stone to touch the air. And if her grandfather had found this crack, this one narrow place where the deep water still rose close enough to reach by hand 50 years ago, then this wasn't the water. This was the sign of the water. The place where you'd dig if you knew, if you'd grown up beside it, if your grandfather had told you where the deep vein ran under the dead wash and made you promise to keep it. A few buckets a day from a hand-dug seep. But underneath it, down past where any association pipe had ever thought to sink, the vein that fed it, still running, still cold, still there. Ruth Vashti hadn't led 5 men out to her well to show them a cup so they'd leave her alone. She'd led them out to make them believe the cup was all there was. And she looked up across the well, across the crowd of men bent over the small water, and she looked at me. Only me. Because I was the one who'd seen her draw it in July, the one who might do the arithmetic she'd just done, the one who could ruin it. And she held my eyes for one long moment over that dark gleaming shaft, and something passed between us that I have never told another living soul, not in 40 years, not once. She was asking me to keep her secret. The real one, the one under the one she'd just given the men. And I stood there in the risen sun with Deacon on his knees at the lip of the cup, believing he'd been shown the whole truth. And I understood that I had one more decision to make, the last and largest of that whole ruinous summer, and that this time no one in the yard even knew it was mine to make. I kept her secret. I may as well tell you that now at the front of it, because I've made you wait through 2 parts to learn what kind of man I finally was, and you've earned the plain answer. I kept it. I stood over that well in the risen sun with the truth sitting hot in my throat. This is only the sign. The real vein runs deeper. She's shown you a cup to hide an ocean. And I looked back at Ruth Vashti across the black water, and I said nothing. But keeping quiet wasn't the decision. I'd been keeping quiet all summer. I was expert at it. The decision came later, and it was harder, and it went against the very silence I'd just chosen. Because here is the thing I understood standing in that yard, the thing that took me the rest of the morning to find the shape of. Her secret would save her, but it would let the county die. And her secret, given up, would save the county and might well kill her. That was the arithmetic. That was the real one, the one under all the others. And it wasn't mine to solve. But God help me, it turned out to be mine to carry to the person it belonged to. The men left the well. Deacon rose off his knees like an old man, though he wasn't so old, and something had gone out of him, not decency. I've told you I won't flatter him that far, but the fire of the thing. He'd ridden out to take a fortune and found a cup, and there's no glory in robbing a starving woman of a cup, no story a man can tell himself afterward that lets him feel large. He brushed the dust off his trousers, and he looked at Ruth, and he said, "This water won't save anybody." "No," she agreed. "It won't. You're a fool to have gone thirsty for trees. They're my trees." He shook his head, and there was something almost like respect in it, the grudging kind a hard man gives to a hardness he can't crack. Then he gathered his men with a look, and they went back across the wash to their horses, and I heard them mount and ride, the dust of them thinning out toward Deacon's failing wells, and whatever came next for all of us, which as far as any of them knew was the slow death of the whole county under a sky that had forgotten how to rain. And then it was just the two of us, standing over the open well in the full morning light. Ruth and the old rancher who'd watched her all summer from a rise, and finally come down off it a few hours too late to be a hero, and just in time to be a witness. She knelt and began to pull the deadfall back over the shaft. "You know," I said. Her hands stopped. "About the vein," I said. "The deep water, this isn't the whole of it. This is where it comes up close. Your grandfather knew where the real water ran, and he dug his seep on top of the sign of it and told you to keep it quiet." I watched her back go rigid. "I figured it just now, watching you show it to them. You didn't lead them out here to save the cup. You led them out here so they'd stop looking, so they'd believe the cup was all there was and go home." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she finished pulling the deadfall over the well, slow and careful, and she stood and faced me. And she was very tired, I could see, tired in the marrow, the summer's rationing and this morning's terror all catching up at once. "And now you'll tell them," she said, flat, not a question, a woman confirming the shape of a betrayal she'd been half expecting her whole life. "No." "Then what?" And that was the thing, then what? I didn't have an answer yet. I'd carried the truth this far and set it down between us, and I didn't know what either of us was supposed to do with it, and I said so. We sat in the shade of the cottonwoods, her grandfather's trees, the ones she'd starved to keep green, and we talked. And it was the longest honest conversation I'd had with another soul since my wife died. And it was with a woman 30 years my junior whom I'd wronged by my silence for 2 months running. She told me the whole of it. Her grandfather had found the vein when he was a young man, dug the seep, kept it off every register and map because even then he understood what she'd learned this summer. That water in a dry country isn't a blessing you can own openly. It's a target. A family that has water when others don't isn't envied, it's hunted. So he'd hidden it, passed it down like a wound. Never tell, he'd said. Not the bank, not the county, not a friend. The day they know is the day they take it, and they'll take the land with it. And she'd kept the promise, all through the dying summer, kept it so hard she'd nearly died herself rather than draw attention by looking too well-watered. "He was right," she said. "You saw them this morning, he was right." "He was right about this morning," I said. "I'm not sure he was right about the whole of it." She looked at me. "The county's dying, Ruth?" I'd started calling her by her name somewhere in that hour, and neither of us had noticed. "Not Deacon, not the association, the county. The Hollies brothers have children. Renner's got grandbabies out on that dry quarter. When the last wells fail, and they're failing, there's going to be families loading wagons and driving away from land their people bled for. Some of them won't make it wherever they're going. That's what's coming. That's the real shape of it under all of Deacon's ugliness. And you want me to save them?" Her voice had an edge now. "The people who came to my porch with 5 horses, the people who let me starve. You want me to hand them my grandfather's vein, the thing he died keeping secret, the thing I nearly died keeping secret, so the men who'd have robbed me can water their fields." "No," I said, and I meant it. "I don't want anything. It's not mine to want. I'm telling you what's true, both of the true things, because you're the only one who gets to decide, and it's not fair for you to decide without knowing both. That's all. That's the only decent thing I've done all summer, and it's about 30 years late." She was quiet a long time. The heat was coming up. Somewhere off across the wash, a mourning dove made its low sound, that sound like grief with the sharp edges worn off. "If I tell them," she said slowly, "they take it. You know they do. A vein like that enough to water the county, that's not a cup they'll leave me. Deacon takes my land inside a year. Some law, some lien, some association rule. He's wanted this orchard for a decade. Give him a reason, and he takes it, and I'm the woman who dug her own grave by opening her mouth." "Maybe." "There's no maybe. You've lived here longer than I have. You know how it goes." And I did. That was the trouble. I knew exactly how it went, because I'd spent 40 years watching it go that way and marking it down in my ledger and doing nothing. And I couldn't stand there and promise her it would go different this time when every year of my life said it wouldn't. So I didn't promise. I did something else instead. I did the thing I should have done at the Grange Hall in July, the thing I'd been too much a coward to do when it was easy and now had to do when it was hard. "Then you don't tell them," I said. "You tell me publicly." You make me the one who found the vein, an old association man, a name they trust, a man with standing. And I bring it to the county as mine to bring. And the price of the water, the price I set that they'll accept from me because they'd never accept it from you, is that the Vashti orchard is protected. In writing, deeded and witnessed. That the well and the land it sits on stay yours forever, and the county gets the water only so long as your title's untouched. You don't give them your secret, Ruth. You sell it through me, and the price is your land and your name. She stared at me. Why, she said. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You watched them starve me, and you sat in the third row. I did. I couldn't look at her when I said it, and then I made myself. I did sit in the third row. That's exactly why. I'll not drag out the ending. Endings, the real ones, don't drag. They arrive and then they're done, and you spend the rest of your life turning them over. We did it more or less the way I'd said, though it was uglier and slower and more frightening than the plan, the way real things always are. I went to the county, not to Deacon, to the county, to the whole Grange Hall packed with frightened families, and I told them a well had been found on the old wash that reached the deep vein, and that it could water them all if it was dug and piped, and that it came with one condition, non-negotiable, witnessed and deeded. The Vashti land was protected in perpetuity, and Ruth Vashti held the title, and the day anyone moved against it, the water stopped. Deacon fought it, of course he did, but here's the thing I'd understood, and he hadn't. He wasn't the county. He was just the man who'd made himself the county's voice back when there was scarcity to lord over. And the moment there was water enough for everyone, real water, the vein, enough to save the children and the grandbabies and the dry quarters, his whole authority evaporated because you can only rule people through what they lack. Give them enough and they don't need a deacon anymore. The Hollies brothers signed. Renner signed and wouldn't meet my eye when he did it, which I took for the closest thing to shame that man had in him. Prout signed. It carried. The vein was real. I'd been right about that, and so had her grandfather, 50 years before either of us. When they dug it down and sank the pipe, the water came up cold and steady and enough. And by the next spring there were green fields across Cardero County where there'd been nothing but crack and dust. And the drought broke that autumn the way droughts do, with a mercy that comes too late for the 11 head I lost, and just in time for everyone who'd held on. They call it the Cardero Well now, on the county maps, not the Vashti Wells. Small towns don't traffic in accuracy, I told you that at the start. But the deed says Vashti. The title's hers. It was still hers last I checked, and last I checked she was an old woman herself, with her grandfather's cottonwoods still standing green out over the wash, the trees she starved to keep, the trees that turned out to be growing right on top of the thing that saved us all. I've kept my ledger all these years. Rainfall, cattle, the small black cross for my wife. There's an entry from that August. Just a date and 3 words in my own bad hand, and I've never crossed them out or added to them, though I've thought about it. And I'll leave you with them the way I left them, because Ruth taught me something that summer about trusting people to understand a thing without having it explained, about the meaning that lives in what you don't say. Came down off the rise. That's all. That's the whole entry. I've never needed it to say more.